They say it's impossible. They say it can't be done. That it's a waste of time, that it's silly or stupid. They ask why. I ask why not. They ask how. I say I'm not really sure, to be honest. But today we make the first leap forward. That's right. When I started this podcast, I thought deep about who has the ultimate ground up story. Who really shows what's possible with the right attitude? Who has come from so little and yet created so much? When I thought about who that person would be, it didn't take long for me to think of one man, The Rock. That's right. I've had this crazy goal to get The Rock on my podcast since the very beginning. It might even be the reason why I started this podcast to begin with, to be able to sit down and tell this man's story, to hopefully inspire the world. But before we do that, we need to inspire The Rock to come on my podcast. And I've been talking about this with guests for a very long time, and we've been brainstorming, trying to figure out the best way to capture his attention, because his attention is very precious, and it's also very difficult to get, because this is a guy that has over 50 million Facebook followers. He has over 95 million Instagram followers. He gets over 10,000, 15, sometimes 20,000 comments a day across all of his social media accounts. So how do we capture that attention? Mind you, I'm a guy who has 75 followers on his podcast Twitter page. So I don't have a lot of ammunition, and I don't have a lot of clout. So it's going to make this one of the most challenging things I've ever attempted to do. But that's why I'm asking for your help. And that's why today is a really important and a special day, because for the first time, I'm launching the website. It's called GetTheRockOnMattsPodcast.com. I've got a hashtag as well. It's called Get the Rock on Matt's Podcast. But if you go to the website, what I've done is I've created a bunch of videos, GIFs, and a really big tweet button. The tweet button auto-generates and creates new tweets every time you click on it, and it sends directly to The Rock. The idea here is if we can get enough of us to message The Rock, to tell The Rock why it would be great to come on to Matt's podcast, to come on the Ground Up Show, then maybe we'll be able to make a dent. Maybe we'll be able to inspire The Rock to come on this show. So what I'm asking for you to do right now to make this dream a reality, to make it come true, pause this podcast, unless you're driving, of course, but pause this podcast. Go to GetTheRockOnMattsPodcast.com, send a little tweet, watch the video, understand the story a little bit deeper. And then when you come back here, I've got an AMA episode today. So I'm going to be answering questions from my newsletter subscribers, problems that they have with their life and areas where they're stuck, and also some behind-the-scenes film stuff that people are asking about and behind-the-scenes podcast stuff. So go to GetTheRockOnMattsPodcast.com, and then we'll start the show. You're listening to The Ground Up Show, a podcast that inspires creatives to make meaningful content and pursue their passions. My name's Matt Diavella, and I'm a filmmaker best known for the Netflix documentary Minimalism. And I'm sitting down with creators to talk about their process, the lessons they've learned, and how to make an impact. All right, guys, thanks for entertaining me. And thank you so much for those of you who are contributing and helping out by tweeting at The Rock, messaging The Rock in any way you can. By the way, if anybody actually knows The Rock, if anybody has a personal connection, maybe we can do like the 5 steps of The Rock to see if we can find somebody who knows The Rock, that we can message him and share this website with him. That would be hugely helpful. But anyway, enough of that. Let's get into the AMA. I've got some great questions here. These questions are all coming from my newsletter subscribers, people who have signed up to get email updates from me. So I gave them first access to ask questions about my life, but also maybe things that they're struggling with. So let's get right into it. The first 2 questions are pretty similar, so I kind of stacked them together. I'll read them both through. Jeff says, the biggest area I continuously get stuck in my health. I have started a gym membership and would go daily for months at a time and eventually lose the motivation. I also live a busy life, being a full-time student, full-time musician, and a part-time employee as well. So finding the time is hard. And you have to make money to survive, right? Do you have any advice on maintaining motivation? And Leander says, I'm going through a stressful time right now, and I really need to get a good workout routine and habit so I can concentrate on my real purpose, which is music and film. I'm working on a film with my brother, and your Making Minimalism series has been a huge help, and we appreciate it. All right, so 2 questions, mostly about how do you keep up the workout routines and how do you develop those habits to live a healthy lifestyle? First, I gotta say, life is a balancing act, and oftentimes we find ourselves out of balance. And it takes awareness, it takes asking questions and continually coming back to an awareness of, are we in balance? Am I really dedicating enough of my time to exercising? Am I dedicating enough of my time to my relationships and the work that I'm passionate about, and also making money and my finances? Because what Jeff said was, you have to make money to survive, right? That is 100% true. And when I graduated college with $97,000 in debt, bought a brand new car, was put into about $117,000 in debt, mostly by my own choosing, I was really struggling with my finances. There was a lot that wasn't going well. I was living at home with my parents. I wasn't really focusing on my relationships as much. And to say that you can be completely in balance is wrong, but to say that you can do better at it is definitely true. So for me in the beginning, it was, all right, let me just focus on my finances. What can I do today to take a step forward in the right direction? I actually started out with writing a letter to myself, forgiving myself for the debt that I was put into, the debt that I put myself into. I took responsibility for what I had done, and it was the only way for me to really put my head down and start in the right direction. And now we got an ambulance in the background. But that was a big thing for me. And I knew that it wasn't going to be able to change everything right in that moment. And I living at home in central New Jersey, I wasn't going to be able to focus as much on my relationships. I did my best to connect with people online, but I had a couple friends from back home that I would hang out with, but other than that, I couldn't really develop and create new relationships in my hometown. So I was focusing on, what can I do today to get out of this? How can I chip away at this debt, which then will actually help free up more personal time that I can spend on my relationships? And then I've really found that if you can find 1 or 2 things to change in your life, 1 or 2 habits to get to stick, it can be a domino effect. It can really affect the rest of your life. When I started exercising and working out for the first time, it was in college, and I had a really tough time. I was really underweight. I was probably 125, 130 pounds, but I really wanted to gain muscle. And I had been trying since I was a teenager, since I was 13 years old, working out in my parents' basement, where I ended up moving back to once I graduated college. But just trying to work out, trying to put on weight, nothing would work, nothing would stick. And then finally in college, it just all started to fall into place. I started to go to the gym every day. I just said, I'm going to go to the gym every single day, 7 days a week, whether it's 15 minutes, 5 minutes, or an hour. I just need to get started. And that's one thing I would say, is that if you don't have time, if you're so busy that you don't have 10 minutes or 15 minutes to exercise, and you don't have to go to the gym, you could do push-ups, sit-ups, whatever, then you're probably a little bit too busy, and you can probably cut back on the things that you're focusing on, because you need to make money. All right, so maybe that's something you don't get rid of, but maybe it's cutting back on other things in your life, and maybe sacrificing temporarily on going out to the bar and drinks on Friday, Saturday night, cutting out on some of the social time. That way you can focus on this one thing that's really important, your health. And then once you develop that habit, it sticks. It actually becomes hard not to go to the gym. So that's what I would say, is focusing on that one habit, that one thing you can get to stick. And when I got it to stick, it changed everything else in my life, because then I started eating healthier. I started adding, smoothies and protein shakes into my diet, and I started to slowly build muscle and build more strength over time. But it didn't happen overnight. It started really slowly. Once I developed the habit, I was able to keep going forward. And I would also say, be careful with motivation and inspiration. And I made a film called Unstuck, The 5 Steps to Change. And a little bit clickbaity in the title, but it was really what I had learned about all these people that we interviewed in minimalism and how they were able to get unstuck. So when I looked at them, a lot of them did use motivation and inspiration, but it's not something that sticks long term. Sometimes it's a moment where you read a book, you read a Tony Robbins audio tape, or you listen to a song, and it really it kickstarts you into this new routine that you want to develop, or this new habit. But that's not what's going to take you through the long run. So what I suggest is become really clear on the why. Why are you doing this? Why is it important to you? And if you can continue to keep that in the front of mind, if you can continue to remind yourself of why you're doing this and why it's important to you, then it's going to be much more likely that you're going to stick through and maintain that habit for the long run. Next question, Pierre. My question is, how did you learn to improve your energy during the day to maintain a high energy when most of the time you might not? So for meetings, during work, etc. So the one thing I think it does come back to the healthy exercise and the healthy habits. Getting enough sleep, incredibly important. Most people don't get enough sleep in America, at least. So focusing on those 2 pillars is going to be huge to improving your wellness and your energy levels throughout the day. Making sure that you're eating. I know when I get really busy, and talk about balance, when I get busy and I'm maybe spending most of my time during work, I'm drinking coffee and I'm having a peanut butter sandwich, and that's what's getting me through the day for most of those really intense days, which I don't suggest you do. I think there's a better way to go about it. But to say that you focus on eating healthy throughout the day. If I were to, instead prep a couple of smoothies in the beginning of the day that would last me the next 2 days, then I'm getting some more energy, some more of the essential vitamins and nutrients that I need to keep myself going. That's incredibly important. I would say also try to gain control of your schedule. So that's one of the reasons why I love being a freelancer, why I love running my own business and working for myself. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody wants to do that. I know so many people that are like, man, I give you credit, but that's not something I would ever want from my life. It's something that I really value. And one of the benefits, like there's a lot of stuff about it that's not glamorous and not fun. And I really had to bust my ass in the beginning and work on bar mitzvah videos, local TV commercials, stuff that's not thrilling and exciting. But what I got to say is once I was able to break through that, and there's still stuff that's not fun and not exciting that I have to do. I got to do my taxes. I got to do, work out what insurance provider to get for my business and all these other stuff that's not really exciting. But once I was able to break through from some of those shitty low level, I wouldn't say low level, but shitty jobs that didn't really fulfill me in the long run and got monotonous and repetitive, I still was able to set my own schedule. I was able to take the clients I wanted. I was able to set the meetings when I want. So say if somebody throws a meeting on your schedule for 4 p.m., it's going to be really tough to keep the energy up all throughout the day and then be sharp on that meeting at 4 o'clock towards the end of the day. So now as an entrepreneur, as somebody who runs my own business, most of the time I can make suggestions. I can say, hey, can we get on a call at 11 a.m. or can we get on a call at 9 a.m.? If it doesn't work, then we can do another day earlier in the morning. But it's really based on my schedule for the most part. Of course, there's going to be some people that are hard to get a hold of and that I really want to talk to, or say maybe a guest, say The Rock. If I want to get him on my podcast and he wants to talk at 7 p.m. at night or 3 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to make it work and I'm going to figure out a way for those temporary bursts. But for the most part, if you take control of your schedule, you can really make sure that your energy is spent in a wise way. I also noticed that the early mornings is when I have my most energy. So that's usually when I do my most important tasks. So in leading up to the launch for Get the Rock on Matt's podcast, for the past 2 to 3 weeks, this has been a work in progress. And if you guys actually go to the website, you'll see how much time I've put into this. I did all the design stuff myself. I made all the GIFs and the videos. There were so many assets. The website, creating the button and evolving it over time and figuring out what was working, what wasn't, and creating this button. My brother helped me to create this auto generation button to tweet the Rock a random message. All this stuff takes a lot of time. And when I start out in the beginning of the day, I'm really energized, I'm really hyped up, and I'm really jazzed up about making this thing happen. But then when it comes to 4 or 5 p.m., by the way, I get up at 5:30 to 6 a.m. So 12 hours into the day, sometimes I'll take a break for lunch in the middle of the day, but I've been working pretty long hours, especially when I'm passionate about something, because it's something that's really fulfilling to me, and I don't really see it as work in the traditional sense. So when I'm putting together this stuff, I will get really tired by 6 p.m., usually a little bit earlier. Usually I hit a wall in the middle of the day. When I go to the gym, it actually re-energizes me, makes me push a little bit further and a little bit harder. But I know I get my best work done from probably 6:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m., 10 a.m. And that's when I'm making these videos. That's when I'm putting together my most creative work. So if you have a job, if you have a 9 to 5 that you are dedicated to, that you love, but you also want to start working on some side projects, and you have some passionate ideas that you really want to execute on, or you want to write, or you want to make a documentary, or you want to start getting into graphic design, I suggest trying to develop an early morning routine. So if you have to be at work by 9, wake up at 5:30 or 6, put in an hour or two on your passion, and just get started. And I think that's the best time to do it. So the most important things to your life, you should try to get them in early in the morning. Oriel, I feel really stuck right now. I'm involved in 2 different associations which ask a lot of my time. I also run my own company, and I'm the mother of 2 under 4 years old. I love what I'm doing with both my associates, but I also feel completely trapped sometimes. I used to say yes for everything, and since I'm automatically the one in charge, everyone is resting on me, thinking that I'm going to do it. Without realizing it, they put a lot of pressure on me, and I feel very stressed and feel very guilty because the time I spend doing these prevents me from doing anything else that I love and spending more time with my kids. I have a hard time saying no. I'm on the verge of resignation. While I love to get involved in these associations, how to say no and stick it in when people and stick to it when people are always trying to find reasons for you to do things for them. That's a really good question. I think it does go back to this idea of perhaps you have too much on your plate right now, and perhaps you can cut back and not do as much stuff. What I always do for say new things come in. People ask me, hey, I interview you for my podcast. Do you want to go out for coffee? Would love to meet up. If it's through an email, that's really easy. I can have the time to think about it. I'm pretty good at saying no because, in the very beginning, of course, you have to say yes to everything. And I said yes to every project I could. I did dozens of wedding videos, bar mitzvah intro videos. It didn't really matter. As long as ethically I was okay with it. I didn't shoot porn or anything like that, but as long as I was ethically okay with it, somebody was paying me to make a video. I said, hell yes, let's do it. And it worked on a couple of different levels. First of all, it was making me an income, which in the very beginning was tough, and it was far and few in between. So early on, I would get a project that would be $200, $400 to shoot and edit a video. If you did the math, I probably was making $10 an hour, but I was really focusing and working on my craft. I was making money, but I'm working on my craft. And those bar mitzvah videos, I talked about it on the episode last week with Josh and Ryan. I did this crazy amount of work and energy put into adding fire on a bat. So this kid was it was for his intro video for his bar mitzvah. So before he came out and was shown in front of his family and friends as a man, they would play this video about him getting hyped up playing basketball and baseball and all this stuff. So I literally went after school to one of his games and I filmed him playing baseball. And what I did was I added this extra animation afterwards to his bat. So like flames would fly out of the bat when he hit the ball. And I did it to the baseball as well. When the pitcher was throwing it to the mound, it would light up with fire. And that probably took me a lot of time. I got paid to do it. And I think I actually got paid pretty well for that project specifically. But I also took it upon myself to go above and beyond because they weren't asking for this extra stuff, these bells and whistles, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun to learn something, but even if it's a project you're not passionate about and you don't love, you're not really excited about the end product that you're creating, you can still put everything you have into it and you're going to learn a lot from that experience. So I forget what the original question. Oh yeah. And then also you don't have to say yes to everything. You can say no. If somebody actually asks you over the phone for something, this happens to me a lot, or at least when I was doing client work, somebody would be I'd be on the phone with a client. We'd be talking about a project and they say, oh, so how much is that going to cost? And early on, I would make the mistake of saying, I guess it would cost somewhere between, it would be like $200 to $300 or, if that's something you can afford. So I'd be like, use this very soft language and I wouldn't be very confident in how I would say it's going to cost this much money. And especially as I started to push my boundaries, like I at some point you have to go from $200 to $500 for a video. At some point you got to go from $5 to $1,000, $1,000 to $10,000. You can't, some people might be able to just make that leap right away and go straight to these high paying clients. But for most people, if you haven't built up the skills yet, you're going to have to start low. But making those jumps is really difficult and you're going to have a lot of self-doubt as you try to make those big jumps. So for me, I couldn't do it over the phone. I couldn't say it's going to cost $10,000. I had to actually say, hey, so let me take the information you just gave me and I'll put together an estimate and I'll break down the cost for you and let you know how much it's going to cost. It actually does a couple things. It first makes sure that you're naming the right price and you're actually charging what you're worth, or you're pushing the edges and trying to, increase your rate, your daily rate or whatever it is. The second thing it's doing is you're really you're validating what the cost of what you're delivering. So you're actually saying, hey, I need some time to think about this. I need to actually put it into paper. And it's actually, you probably should be taking a little bit extra time, even if you have a good sense and you could give a range. I would also say don't give a range, give like 3 tiers. This is like, we're getting specific now, but give a couple of different options for them to choose from. And usually they'll choose that middle tier, but it allows you to add more value and to also increase your revenue. So yeah, like it gives you some time too. Like if somebody asks for something over the phone, hey, can you do this and this? Let me get back to you. I'm not really sure. I got to look at my schedule. It's okay to take time. It's also okay to say no. Once you actually are busy and once you have all these things on your plate, it's completely okay to say no. David, what are your views on alcohol consumption, and how do you or others you've interviewed find a balance when it comes to alcohol? A couple of my episodes have actually been alcohol fueled. My podcast episode with my friend Jesse Earl, Jordan Lejeune, or is it's Lejeune? I messed it up on the podcast too, and now anytime I say his name, I screw it up. But Jordan, and that episode is called The Future. He runs a website called Futurism. He co-founded it. And Jesse Earl, my friend, I think actually the one with Jacob Sokol, we actually drank as well, and we talked a little bit about that, how it kind of loosens you up a little bit. Obviously, it can be used as a crutch, which isn't a good thing, but those episodes were really fun for me. I enjoy alcohol in moderation. Certainly when I was in college, I drank a lot, and I pushed myself a little bit too far, and I certainly had nights where I took the alcohol consumption to a point where I got very sick. So there's obviously, especially when you're young, you're just trying to find the limits there. And it was just, it was a time for me to do that. But then now as I've gotten older, alcohol affects me in a way different way, in that I can't rebound as quickly. So one thing that's happened for me is that I actually can't drink beer anymore. Unfortunately, I love beer, and I will have a beer from time to time, but I would notice that I would just get these raging headaches after drinking one beer, sometimes the night of, sometimes the morning after. So that was really challenging for me, because I had to say, all right, well, I can't, like, there is a pro and con to drinking this beer. It's going to feel good temporarily, but in the long run, I'm going to feel like shit. So for the most part now, I don't drink beer. I'll drink a cider. I don't drink too much anymore. I'll have a couple of drinks. I rarely get drunk. But I do enjoy that. It is fun. It is for me, I can still enjoy that in moderation. I really enjoy whiskey and scotch, and I have a small little collection of 5 or 6 bottles that, whenever I find a new bottle, I might grab a new thing of scotch. To me, I really enjoy the taste. Still, it comes with a sacrifice. There are some people that I've interviewed that do not drink alcohol. Rich Roll, for instance, a couple episodes ago, he was actually an alcoholic and battled with that for most of his life after college. So he went through rehab and completely cut out alcohol. He can't bring it back into his life. So for those people who are suffering with real addictions, I haven't seen anybody who's been able to balance a moderation and bring it back into moderation. I can't even comment on that, whether that would be a advisable thing to do, but something tells me that it really wouldn't. But if you can enjoy alcohol in moderation, I think it's totally fine. I've had many good times drinking alcohol, and I would actually love to have every episode over a drink or a glass, or most episodes have whiskey, and because it tends to give a more relaxed vibe. Because one of the challenges with doing this podcast, I've done about 35 interviews so far, is that a lot of the people 90% of the people I'm talking to, I have never met and never even had a conversation with. It's just I've emailed them and they've said, yeah, I'd love to come on the podcast. And then they come and I meet them for the first time at my apartment. And at that point, I have to kind of, first of all, I don't want to take up too much of their time. They're here for maybe 2 hours. So we talk a little bit and we, kind of shoot the shit, but then we got to start the podcast and you have to get going with it. And, drinking coffee, as comfortable as that might be, it adds more of a frenetic energy to it, where if people were just sitting down and having a drink after, after a day's work, they might feel a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more comfortable talking to a stranger. So that's one of the challenges. But the thing is that I can't do that because I can't drink that much alcohol. I think that would be a really unhealthy habit to build if I hinged this podcast on drink with Matt. So I chose not to, but every once in a while I'll bring it back in because I think it's fun. Darren has a question about the podcast and the mics I use. What type of microphones do you use, and what's your podcast setup look like? So anybody who listens to the podcast, you might not know at this point, but I actually film every single episode, and I've got a I guess it's complicated from the outside. A lot of people, when they look at it, they get a little bit intimidated. There's some people that I've told, or at least I've shown them videos of what I've made, and they're just completely surprised to see that there is video that I'm filming each of these episodes. They're like, I thought this was a podcast. So maybe I should be more clear about that. But the mics I use are the SM7Bs. I've got 2 of them. I got these mics because I saw they were used on Mark Maron, and Joe Rogan uses them as well. They're kind of the best of the best in terms of podcasting for the price. I think they do run, the mics themselves probably run like $700 or $600 or something like that. Maybe less. But the thing is, then you have to have all these extra things. And I can show you here, like this right here. It plugs into a cloud lifter. because for whatever reason, these mics record at a lower volume. So I need that to kick up the volume. And then that plugs into a Zoom H6 audio recorder. I can actually lift this up too if it doesn't screw everything up. This is my audio recorder right there. It's really great because it's got 4 XLR inputs. So it allows me to interview up to 3 other people, which is recently I did with Josh and Ryan. They were the first ever 2-person podcast. They are the minimalists, so I couldn't split them up, at least not yet. Maybe we'll get them individually on to talk about their stories another time. But that was important to have this kind of device that allowed me to record with 2 people. I've got another episode coming up in, I think it's next week. It's really good. It's called, these guys have a company called Living on One. They have an amazing documentary called Living on $1 and Salam Neighbor. These guys like put themselves into these immersive situations where they went down to, I believe it was Brazil, for 2 months and lived on $1 a day. So that was an incredible interview, and to have both of them there on the same time was way better and much more of a collaborative discussion than if it was just these one-on-one interviews. So I really like it. I enjoy it. This setup allows me to do that. I did buy an extra, so I have 3 of these mics. It was tough. It was like, this is like a lot of money. I don't know if because I'm not making any money doing this podcast. This is not, as you know, I don't do advertising on it. And so to spend money on it and to know that there is no foreseeable future in which I will make my money back, it's kind of tough. But for me, it's a hobby. It's a passion. I really love it. And I was like, you know what? This is worth the investment for me right now. So that's pretty much the audio setup. I got these stands right here too. I went from the tall stands where you kind of you can pull it and move it around. The thing that I don't like about those is that I just always am tinkering and moving it around. And if you watch some of the earlier episodes I did, I probably move it around every single time I talk. I'll bring it towards me and pull it away for no reason at all. So I do like these stands, that they're very sturdy. The other good thing about the stands is that people don't move these around. And when I'm filming, I'm shooting at a really shallow depth of field because, as you can see, if I move back or if I move forward, I go out of focus. And I'm good at that myself. Like, I can obviously stay put. I'm pretty I know that that's what I'm trying to do, but I'm not trying to tell my guest, hey, make sure you don't move at all, because then they're gonna feel uncomfortable. Going back to, like, these are strangers that I just met for the first time. They're new friends. I want them to feel comfortable and feel like they can move around. But usually I'll tell them, just if you could stay within an inch or two from these mics, because if you hear how I talk, once I move further and further away from the mic. Now I'm about a foot away from the mic. Doesn't sound good at all. So you actually do have to talk really close to these mics for it to make a dent, make a difference. So I have 3 of these podcast mics. The video was, so I have Sony A7S. That's what's recording this one right now. And I got an A7R, which records. That's actually usually used on me because I find that quality isn't as great as the A7S, especially in low light situations. I'll have those both set up on Manfrotto tripods. I have 2 Metabones adapters, and I gotta say, this has been evolving and changing, and it's in the past 2 episodes, actually in the next 2 episodes that you'll see that I recorded already, it's changed quite a bit, and there's gonna be much more depth of field on my angle because I got 2 Metabones adapters, which allows me to use my Canon lenses. And I know I'm getting really technical here, and I'll get back to some like normal people stuff, but I know that a lot of people that listen to this are interested in that, and they're also interested in filmmaking and kind of the nitty-gritty details. So I've got, a 24 millimeter Canon prime lens that's on me right now that I use. What do I use? No, I actually don't even use, I only use this on this one because it's a wide angle lens, and it's just for a 1 person on camera type deal. It just makes more sense. It would be weird to have a close up of me doing this solo podcast. But what I do is I put the 50 millimeter prime on for the guest, which is beautiful. That image comes out so nice. I used to do a wide angle lens, but I think that this one is a little bit, it just creates such a great depth of field. And actually, one of the reasons I did it was because of this apartment that I'm in. If you look at this apartment, it's pretty bare. My old apartment in Brooklyn was a lot better in terms of the design and the style. And it was, it wasn't necessarily a better apartment, but I had this room that was specifically for podcast filming. So I left everything set up. It was really dark and moody, and I had this nice light underneath of it. Coming to this apartment, everything's bright. It's pretty bare. I don't have a lot of stuff decorated where my podcast is going to be recorded. So I was like, all right, well, I need to up the depth of field and create this really beautiful bouquet around the person's face. So you can't see what's in the background, and that allows me to shoot this pretty much anywhere. So that's what I do for that lens. The other one now it's the A7R on me with the Canon 70 to 200 millimeter lens. And that lens, it's got to be a little bit further away, but it creates a pretty nice depth of field on me as well. But they're a little bit tighter in. I use 2 small HD monitors. I think one's a 5-inch and one's a 7-inch. And these monitors, for me, they're important, and I set them up and so I can view and make sure it's really just for my own well-being and my sanity. I want to make sure that this podcast is still recording and nothing happened and it didn't shut off, because if anybody had listened to the Joe Nation episode that I did a little while back, he stopped me halfway through the podcast and said, hey, by the way, I don't know if you want to check your camera, but the iris just shut. And I looked at it, and then the card became corrupt, and that was really frustrating. And while I don't know with these specific, that's never happened before, though anybody who's worked in film and technology knows that these things happen all the time, and it's just a matter of time before something kicks off or doesn't work in the way you want it to. That's why when you're doing a big doc project or something really important, or if I get The Rock on the podcast, I'm probably not going to use these cameras. I'll either rent out or hire people to help me out with it, because when you have a professional film camera, these cameras aren't necessarily intended for video, or at least high stakes video stuff. You want to make sure that it's going to work and then it's not going to fail. And some of these cameras have redundancies, so you can put 2 cards in and record on 2 cards at once. So if one gets corrupt, if something happens, you drop it and it falls in a puddle of water, you still have the ability to use the other card. So I have these monitors so I can at least view and make sure for my peace of mind that it's still working. And if something happens to go wrong, I can adjust and fix it in the moment. I was lucky that Joe was a filmmaker as well, so he knew that. Nobody else would have known, iris shut, camera's probably not working. So that's, okay, that, and then I have a light. I have a C-stand here, which I'm not going to show it. I'm probably going to do a behind-the-scenes video here, but at some point, and you can check groundupshow.com is where I keep all those updates. But I got a C-stand, and I didn't always do this, but just always kind of experimenting and upping the quality. I did it in Brooklyn, but it's this paper lantern, and it's amazing. They cost, I think, $10 for 5 of them on Amazon. And then I have just a light with a 100-watt daylight bulb, and it creates this beautiful, soft glow, which is really helpful and really nice for doing something like this. I wouldn't necessarily bring it on a professional shoot because it doesn't look professional, but it, as in like when you see it, but the final product, you guys can't see that I'm being lit by this $10 Amazon Prime paper lantern. So that's pretty much it. So it doesn't sound too complicated, but it's definitely about understanding the situation that you're going into, understanding the room that you're in. And there's so many different, every podcast episode looks a little bit different. I don't like that it looks a little bit different. In the right, I guess the ideal world, I would have a podcast studio, which we're working on, by the way. Josh and Ryan from The Minimalist, they have a Patreon now that they're raising money to create a podcast and film studio. So like that's going to be the ideal scenario where I can look at the space and say, all right, what cameras, what lenses, what lighting do we want to bring into this space? How can we control it the most? Because right now I have a big light right here, which is natural light coming in, which you might think is good. And sometimes it can be. But when you're doing consistent work and you want everything to look the same, you want to be in 100% control of everything, of all the lights, the audio. And that's really can only happen if you can, be in a room where there's no windows, or at least you can block out the windows. So this works for me right now. It works for what I'm doing, but of course, things will probably change. We've got another question here. Chris, I guess the big questions I have for you are as follows. How do you avoid distraction? How do you find your focus when your mind might be thinking about something else? How do you work? Large chunks of work, or do you break it down into smaller tasks? So question number 1, how do you avoid distraction? I can't say that I always avoid distraction. Distractions happen. That's what they are. They're distractions. So what I find myself lately, sometimes I get distracted on Twitter or Instagram, like anybody, Facebook. I have the that instinct once you open up your browser, and I go and then I just press enter, and then I go into the browser, I put twit, and then I press enter, and then it automatically goes to these things, and I check my notifications, and I look to see what other people are up to and what other people are doing. So I'm not great at it, and it's back to that balance. Sometimes I'm doing really great at cutting that out, and sometimes I'm not doing a good job at all. But some things that I do on my phone specifically, I've got my phone here. One thing, I cut off all notifications. The only notifications I get on my phone are through text messages. And here's like what my phone looks like. I think usually, sometimes I even only just keep a couple icons on the homepage, but now I've got it kind of filled up. But it's just 2 pages there. And then at the top left, it's like the furthest away. I've actually put it into a folder. It's called Twice a Day. And I allow myself to check these Twitter, Instagram, MailChimp. Like, I would delete them, and at points I have deleted Facebook from my phone and deleted all that stuff from my phone, email especially. But lately, I've found myself in need of these things, because if I'm posting something that I got to post to Twitter and Instagram, a lot of what I do now is just promoting my stuff through social media. So I kind of need that stuff. But the twice a day thing is like, that's like wishful thinking, because I did it for the first couple of days, and then I just kind of fell off the wagon, and I'll check it more often than not. But the hide them, maybe I'll move it to the second screen, move it to the third screen, even just kind of get it out of sight. And also just switch up those icons every once in a while, because then you find yourself going into these just habits, and that kind of kills the habit. A lot of times I'll leave the house without my phone. I'll go to the grocery store, and you'll start to notice how much this great guy, Anthony, he's got a website called breakthetwitch.com. Had a pleasure connecting with him a couple months ago. He's a really good guy. He's got some amazing content on minimalism, and he talks about the Twitch. And so say you go to the grocery store by yourself, and you're waiting at the deli counter. The first thing you do is you just go for your phone to pull it out. Or you're waiting in line. There's a line for the checkout. The first thing you do is you have that twitch to go for your phone. It's nice when your phone's not there, because then it actually breaks the twitch. And then you're able to actually realize, oh, okay, now I can be a little bit more mindful. I'm not like a chimp running on or a hamster running on a wheel. Those things I find to be very helpful in terms of just being more mindful and asking the right questions and avoiding distractions. I find when I'm really passionate about the work I'm doing, when I'm really excited about what I'm doing, whether it's Get the Rock on Matt's podcast, or it's minimalism or anything else, that's enough for me to avoid distraction, because I am so excited about what I'm creating, especially at the beginning of the day in the morning when I do my best work, that nothing else can really get in the way of that. I love this idea of, people have talked a lot about, and I've talked a lot about this on the podcast, and something I've been exploring and asking people is, like, do you look at the comments? How do you deal with feedback? How do you deal with criticism? There's some people that say, don't look at any of it. Work with a blindfold on, or at least work without a blindfold, but then once you release it, put a blindfold on and forget about what everybody's saying. And then there's other people that saying, I respond to every single comment. Every single person that tweets at me, I respond. Every YouTube comment, I respond to, good or bad. Every email. I find myself somewhere in the middle there. I don't think it's about absolutes. I I don't think you have to respond to every single comment or like every single comment. I see a lot of them. I see most of them. When you're creating on these platforms, you can't really hide from the feedback and the comments. But to me, it's not. It doesn't really affect me as much anymore. Once you start creating and putting stuff on the internet, especially on YouTube, you'll get some shitty comments. I haven't gotten that much, but it really doesn't bother me. I kind of expect it at this point. But you have to go with your gut, because say if you're not listening to people's feedback, if you're paying no attention at all to what anybody is saying, you don't even know if people are listening to you or following you. Is that how you should create? Should you create with a complete blindfold where you don't even know if you're making an impact, if what you're saying is getting through? I don't think so. I think you think about a street performer. These are the people that get feedback instantaneously because they go out and they perform and nobody listens, nobody watches. So they're like, all right, I got to do something a little bit differently. This is obviously not entertaining people. This is not exciting. What can I do to make this exciting? There is a negative side of that, because if you keep doing that, you might start asking the wrong questions, and you might start creating clickbait, and you might just be focusing on creating really flashy thumbnails as opposed to focusing on the real work and what's really important. So you got to be looking at the right kind of feedback. But I do think that you have to be in tune with that. I think a lot of this comes from your gut. It's not a science. It's not, hey, every 10 comments you got to look at and, that's the one that you need to dedicate your life to, or that's going to change your mind about something. No, just keep an open mind. Keep looking at the feedback and understanding what, might be stray, what might not. But you have to come back to your gut and say, all right, this is how I'm going to move forward. This is how we're going to move on from here. This was kind of a 3-part question. So how do you find your focus when your mind might be thinking about something else? Like I said, you can put constraints on yourself. Find different constraints that you can add to your life. I forget what the name of, there's so many of these ones though, like some like time tracker that tracks everything that you're doing online. That's a nice one to see over a week or two how you're using social media, how you dedicate your time. It's kind of an eye opener. Some also will restrict access. I've done this before where I restrict my access to Facebook or Twitter or other sites that during specific times where I'm like, hey, during 6 a.m. to 12 p.m., I really want to get all my work done. So I'm going to make these sites impossible to get to by using this app that blocks them. And then other times I can check it and I can kind of feed that hamster mind. But that might, if you're really struggling with it, that might be a solution for you to actually get jump started and pursue the right path in terms of managing those distractions. How do you work? Large chunks of work, or do you break it down into smaller tasks? That really depends on whether it's a big project or a small project. Small projects, I can get through pretty quickly. At this point, I've edited thousands of videos. So for me to work on a 30-second or a minute spot, it's going to take me a half a day, if not less. Especially if I'm working on it just myself and I don't have anybody else giving me feedback or saying, hey, you need to put it this direction, that direction. So for me, working on the small projects, I can tend to knock them out quick. I just want to go beginning to end, boom, let's just finish this project as quick as possible. How can I get through it and export it and then save it? I usually rarely ever create something and release it on the same day. Sometimes I do, but for the most part, I'll create a podcast episode or create these short videos, and then I'll release it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the road. That actually helps because sometimes the first go at it, it's not the best go. So I'll look back at this video that I did. I just did this Rich Roll teaser, which is called Get Started. And I love it. I humbly will say it's an amazing video, but he's such a passionate guy, so inspiring. And he was just talking about how you just need to get started and that we make so many excuses for not starting. And I had to go through a couple iterations. I got this guy, Reese Robinson. He's incredible. He lent me some of his footage that he shot with Rich Roll, running and doing all these, this really beautiful athletic footage that he created. So I needed to reach out to him to get the HD footage, but I cut together one teaser as quickly as I could. I got it done. I was like, this is great. Cool. Done. And then a couple of days later, I look back at it because I wasn't going to release it for another 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, I could probably tweak this a little bit better. I could adjust the timing a little bit. Maybe I can cut this phrase out. Hey, let me try to add this phrase back in. No, that doesn't work. So coming back to it helps. I sometimes wonder, does anybody notice those subtleties? But I notice, and I think that's all that matters. So for me, I keep focusing on, how can I improve? How can I make this just a little bit better? And for the small tasks, that's how I get it done. If the big tasks, you have to break up into smaller increments. So making minimalism let's just look at the post-production. It was the span of 3 to 4 months. It was exhausting. I loved it. I hated it. It was a project and a story that I had to tell, but it was so difficult and so challenging at times to tell this story. My first feature documentary, my first time really ever telling a story over 60 minutes. So there's so many moving pieces. I did break it up into smaller chunks and smaller chapters to where even in Final Cut where I edited it, they would be separate. I think you call it it's like a nest. That's what it used to be called. It's called compound clip now, where you can click on the clip. It looks really clean from the outset. You would look at my entire timeline and it would be these 12 chapters or 12, maybe 15, I forget how many, but all these different scenes, and it would just look like, oh, well, that's the most simple timeline I've ever seen. But then if you double click on any of them, it opens up into this really complex structure and this really detailed look at every single shot, every single clip, sometimes 10, 15 layers stacked on top of each other to make something work. So I would just go one by one and I'd work on each of these and say, okay, this scene, I feel this is the scene I'm going to be working on today. I'm going to just get as much done as I can, keep going through. Okay, cool. And then maybe tomorrow I don't feel really inspired to work on that scene, so I work on another scene. And it's this fluid process, again, coming back to the gut, coming back to the experience that I have as a filmmaker and all the other projects that I've done, knowing what I need to do. I do keep a checklist, so I use this app called To Do. It's TEUXDEUX.com, and it's amazing. It costs money. It's like $1 a month, or I don't know, $10 or $30 a year. So worth it. This app is incredibly simple, and it's how I organize my entire life. It's literally just, it just shows every day, and I just focus on what I'm doing today. There's certain things that I can push to tomorrow or 2 days in advance, but it's just a simple checklist, a simple to-do. There's thousands of these apps, but this one is the best for me. It works the best for me. They have a great app for the phone because they kept it incredibly simple, and there's not all this extra shit on top of it that you don't need. So for me, it's like if I'm doing a big project like that, I'm like, work on this scene. So I think of an idea also, like, oh man, I should look at that Sam Harris interview. I think I remember him saying something about meditation that might be able to fit here. So then I would just put an extra in the to-do list, check Sam Harris interview. And then I'll remember, oh yeah, okay, that's what or Sam Harris meditation interview, something like that. So it jogs my memory about what I'm looking for, because there are so many different moving pieces and so many different things. You shoot 20, in my film Design Disruptors, we shot 80 interviews. So it's really figuring out and organizing those thoughts as well as the work you need to do every day. But I certainly do break it up. Steven asks, I got an itchy nose right now. I don't know if anybody's watching this on video, but there's just I got this itch on my nose. It's it won't go away. I keep scratching it, but it keeps itching. Anyway, I'm really proud of this. I'm going through all this in one take. There's no edits. It's going to happen. I might have just ruined it right now, but that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I just want to go through here and spitball off the top of my head, get an hour in. I didn't think I was going to do it. That's another thing with these podcast episodes I do. Some are easier than others. The conversation doesn't flow as naturally. I've got one coming up in 2 weeks, I think, with Alexis Wilkinson. This is my favorite interview of all time. It was crazy. It's hard to even explain what happened. It moved so fast, and we barely even talked about her story. It kind of interweaved in between it, but we just went on all these tangents. It was hilarious. I was dying by the end of it. But those are the conversations that I love. and it's really easy, but they're not all that easy. And hers, I think it was like an hour and 50 minutes we talked. It was easy. It flew by. And actually, I feel kind of bad when I'm like, oh, shit, I probably shouldn't take up 2 hours of this person's time. But when I do some other interviews, nothing about them, but it's just the fact that there's, whether it's me or it's we're both having a bad day, or we're both like just not feeling as talkative, it can be a little bit more challenging to bring people's stories out of them and to really have a conversation that's fluid. Sometimes people might be like overthinking it and thinking a little bit too much about, how do I sound? How do I want to come across? As opposed to, this podcast format, which is like long form conversation. Let's just chat and let's see where it goes. And, I do want to talk about your story, but if there's something more interesting to talk about, there's something more fun, if there's something that's going to be more exciting, my number one rule is if I'm enjoying the conversation, other people are. And that's really the only thing that guides me. I have to really make sure, hey, am I enjoying this? Am I having fun? Am I learning something from this person? And if I am, then I think you guys will as well. But anyway, it comes back to, sometimes I look down at the H6, the recorder, and it says like 15 minutes in, and I'm like, oh, fuck. Oh, shit. How am I gonna, because I have this my goal for every episode is like at least an hour. I got to get at least an hour. Like I can do an hour. And usually, sometimes it's right at an hour. Sometimes it's like an hour, 15 minutes. But sometimes I look down at the recorder and I'm like, fuck, 15 minutes in, how am I possibly going to make this interesting, engaging, and stretch this out for an hour? But I do, for like whatever, you just keep going, you think about new questions to ask. That's why it's nice too I usually have notes for every episode. I rarely go to them, but oftentimes, say if I'm nervous, I'm interviewing somebody that's really big, I'll have a list of questions jotted out that I can always go back to in a pinch. Steven, my question is, how was the transition from NYC to LA? I will move to the latter in a few days, and I dream of living in the Big Apple. That's great. Well, congrats on the move. My move, oh man, it's been amazing. Not to hate on New York, Natalie and I, my girlfriend, we moved to LA July 25th. And so far, for the few months that we've been here, we absolutely love it. New York is an amazing place. It's inspiring. It's captivating. There is everything to do. It also, for me, it can be a little bit claustrophobic. It can be a little bit grungy, a little bit too absorbed in the hustle. I love hustle. I work hard, but there's like a stressful hustle when you're out on the streets of New York and you're in the subway and you're commuting to work and you're doing these things that pulls you in a direction that you have no control over. And I find myself, after being in New York for, say, 3 months, I lived there for close to 5 years between Hoboken and Brooklyn. And I find myself, so like say I'm there for 3 months straight, and then I go to visit my parents in Jersey, and all of a sudden I feel this like weight off my shoulders. Like I feel like, oh wow, like I've been tense this whole time. I've been just like, for whatever reason, I've been anxious. Maybe it's the buildings, the traffic, the noise. But coming to LA, I don't feel that as much. You feel it a little bit. I mean, we're still in the city. We live in West Hollywood, so we're kind of in the middle of it. Nothing like New York, but there is this frenetic energy to New York that is hard to escape and hard to avoid. But coming to LA has been amazing. The weather. People are going to hate me because everybody hates the people from LA that always talk about the weather and all this stuff. The traffic has been fine. I haven't really been worried about that. It's been great. We've honestly settled in so quick. It didn't take any time at all for us to really feel like this was home. The hardest part is being away from family, for sure. Like that's a challenge. It's always going to be a challenge as you grow up. I've got a big family. I come from a family of 7 kids, so I've got 6 siblings out there. My sister Michelle's in LA. My brother Mark and sister-in-law Courtney and nephew Oliver are in Philadelphia. A couple of the girls are back home still. My brother Mike's in Virginia. I don't know. I decided to go through everybody. Megan, she's outside of Philadelphia. So everybody's just all over the place. And but that's just the way it is. That's what happens when you grow up, is that our lives pull us in different directions. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to accept that your journey is going to be a little bit different than others. But for me, it's like really important to make sure that I keep my family close, and I go home and I make visits and trips as often as I can, as often as my schedule allows it, to just be close to family. So that means, and you know, the extra challenge that we have is that Natalie is from Australia. So, I mean, I give her so much credit, because that's got to be so hard to be that far away from family and most of your friends. Like, a lot of her friends, thankfully, they kind of have also taken different paths, and they're in London and they're all over the world. But a lot of her friends are still in Australia, and it's like, how do you manage those relationships? How do you stay close with people? Technology has helped a lot, but for us, it's like, all right, let's go back to, we switch Christmases every year now. So last Christmas we were in Australia. This Christmas we'll be in New Jersey. It's not that I can't really complain about visiting Australia more often, because I love it. It's amazing. It's such a beautiful country. Also, gay rights and gay marriage just was legalized. Well, not legalized. They passed. I don't know. It's kind of a complicated story, but they just had a vote, and the vote went through to legalize gay marriage. I'm not sure if it's going to go into effect soon, but that's amazing. So that's exciting, and that's my hamster brain just running off in circles. But it's family's so important. Friends are so important. Relationships are everything. So we just really need to make sure that we keep those in balance. Todd, my reason for emailing is we're in the middle of post-production of our documentary film, Finding Hig. And I have a lot of questions about distribution and getting our film to as many eyes as possible. Do you have any resources you can point me to, or any advice based on your experience with minimalism that may be of help to us? So I do have a series called Making Minimalism, which is a 6-part series where I interview with Josh and Ryan from The Minimalist, Inspire, the media company that we partnered up with to help execute and bring this film to life. It wasn't easy, but we didn't focus on distribution up front. The one nice thing was that Josh and Ryan had an audience. It wasn't as big as it is now, but they had an audience that we could release this film to. And that's all we thought it was going to be. It was, all right, let's just really focus on making the best film we can. We're really passionate about this story, this idea, and this message, and we think it will help a lot of people. Let's focus on that. How can we best tell the story? How can we best emotionally move people to take action in their lives, to simplify their lives, and to focus on living more meaningful and more fulfilled lives, to focus on the important things? And that was really, that's all we focused on. But then, of course, once you finish the film, now we're like, all right, how do we get this in front of people? We did a theatrical run through Gather, a distribution company that allowed us to put it in like 500 theaters around the country. That was really fun, really exciting. Things are changing now. I wouldn't recommend doing that. A lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money. Like, I think we got a revenue of $300,000, $280,000 through the theaters. Barely made any money from that. Like, I think it was, I didn't even break even from our production costs and everything that we spent on distribution up until that point, and like going to film festivals and all that stuff. So we didn't even make any money from the theater run. That's why I say it's probably not the best idea, because 50% goes to theaters, 50% that's left over goes to the distribution company, and then there's all these other fees that you have to pay out, and then by the end of the day we're making a couple $1,000s on that, like $280,000. So because the thing to keep in mind is that money is important, and you should be able to get paid for your art. And in the beginning I was like, I just want to make my money back on this thing, and I think that was a great and a noble goal. But at the end of the day, I want to keep doing this. This was such an amazing experience, and I got to make this film that touched a lot of people, and I want to keep doing that and keep making films that hopefully can get people to question things and dig a little bit deeper in their own lives. So for me, minimalism was a chance for me to say, all right, like, I want to do this again. but I need to actually make a profit. I need to actually make money. And we ended up doing that like by getting it on Netflix and doing this other stuff. We got on Netflix through third-party companies. Third-party companies helped to partner with us. So like that was obviously a challenging role. The advice I would give to you, if you're trying to get distribution for your film, make sure you have a really amazing trailer, cut together a short trailer, and start reaching out to these companies. There's so many media companies like Hulu, Netflix, Comcast has one. All these companies have one, and they're really hungry for good content. So you have to make a good film first and a good trailer to captivate, because even if it's a good film, people probably aren't going to watch it if you don't have good media surrounding it, as in good trailers, good imagery, beautiful design. These kind of things pull people in and let them know that what you're creating is legit. But if you have an amazing film and you can cut together an amazing trailer, just bust your ass to get in the door. Don't spam people. Make connections. It's always better to have the connections in place before you even start the film. So now we actually have a connection. We didn't have one before, but we have one with Netflix, and we've gotten to meet some of the people over there. They're totally amazing. And but we have a foot in the door, and that doesn't mean they're going to accept our next project. Chances are they probably won't, and they've been upfront with us about that. That there's no guarantees, but we will happily, watch what you guys are creating and explore ideas with you and help you out and actually help you to craft the projects that you're creating. So it's building those relationships before you get into it. If you don't have the relationships, make really dope shit. Make an amazing film. And a good book for you to read would be Seth Godin's Purple Cow. It's just about you be so good, people can't ignore you. If you go past a field and you see a bunch of cows that all look the same, but one looks purple, that stands out. You say, oh, wow, okay, that's a purple cow. I think I'm not doing it justice to this book, but it's this idea of just be unique, be original, and your work will stand for itself. And that's really the best advice that I could give you, Todd. So good luck on your film. One last question here. Blake, are you making a living off of your own projects, i.e. films, YouTube, podcast, or are you taking on client work as well? What does that model look like for you? Yes and no. This podcast makes me no money. YouTube makes me no money. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, my original projects, Unstuck, my newsletter doesn't make me any money. I make no money, which it's good to have a girlfriend like Natalie. She's very successful, and she keeps my sanity because I know even if shit hits the fan, even if I don't make any money this year or next year, she'll be there to support me and as I pursue these crazy big ideas. Minimalism has made money, and has it made me a profit, and it's given me a little bit of runway here, in addition to the client work that I've done. So I've done client work for years, and it's allowed me to, and I've been really smart with my money. I paid off all my debt. So early on when I was talking about the $117,000 in debt that I was in, I was able to pay that off. And that has allowed me a freedom to stop today doing client work. So I recently finished up my last client project, and now I'm able to focus on more ambitious ideas, bigger ideas, crazier ideas that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. I'm able to focus on this podcast and put a lot of time and energy into it. I'm able to focus on making these YouTube videos, things that are, a lot of these are just experiments. This podcast is an experiment. It's an attempt to do something a little bit different, to make engaging video content through a podcast is something that it's been done, but it hasn't been done in the most cinematic way possible. And what I'm trying to do is which you might have seen on Rich Roll's episode, he talked about is elevating the level. How can you elevate podcasting to a new level? And I can't assume and expect to make money in the very beginning. And I don't know if I'll ever will, or I'll ever monetize the podcast. I don't think I will ever add advertisements on here. So that it makes me more focused and more engaged, less on the money. I'm not focusing on the money. I'm focusing on how do I make the best thing I can? How do I make the best podcast possible? How do I continue to make this episode better than the past episode, better than the past episode? And that to me is what drives me. So the client work is done. I'm not doing any more client work. minimalism. I still make a little bit of money from that. Like every quarter we get some sales in, which helps me to keep going and keep pursuing this thing. And I was really smart about it. I took calculated risks. I paid off all my debt and I saved up a bunch of money to the point where I was comfortable taking a step away from making money. And that to me, it was important for me to tackle this. And I had Natalie's support from the beginning, which is everything. And there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if it's going to work, if the pieces are going to fall together, but I'm enjoying it. And I love every single day waking up in the morning and being able to work on my own projects, being able to work on things that I'm passionate about. I can't tell you how amazing that feels. And I think that's a good place to leave this episode off. Once again, thank you guys so much for being a part of this journey. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast and asking me your really thoughtful questions. If you want to be a part of the next AMA, sign up for my newsletter, and then I'm gonna, for at least the time being, I think that's a nice way to help out the newsletter, give them a chance to ask questions. I get to everyone, so please feel free to do that. You can subscribe on my website, minimalistfilmmaker.com. And I have to end this episode with one request, and you know what it's gonna be. If you didn't at the beginning of this episode, go to gettherockonmadspodcast.com. Today is such an exciting day. I honestly, I can't tell you how important this is to me, and how giddy I am and how jazzed up I am to get this website out there and to start getting The Rock's attention. I have no idea if it's going to work. I have to believe, though. I have to believe that we can make a difference, that we can make a dent. So that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.